Okay, thank you for that, and thank you for the warm welcome, and thank you, Ambassador, Deputy Minister, and Minister. So, I have those addressed in the remarks that I was going to give. So, the two things I'd like to talk about are food and fuel, which are the two things that are necessary for for this discussion and for the continuation, not just for the short term, but for the long term. Let's start with food. The war against Ukraine, and we all know Ukraine is known as the breadbasket of the world. It's threatening the global food supply, and that's been talked about, and that's understood. Ukraine's top three exports: seed and seed oils, corn, and wheat. Uh, you know, exactly what Canada does. Uh, However, many of the Ukrainian farmers, as you know, have been forced to abandon their fields, not just for these three, but other commodity crops, as they're faced with the choice of, fleeing, fighting, or surviving. And none of these choices involve farming. Many countries have been reactive with aid and support during this crisis. However, we must increasingly be proactive, as this war is not a singular occurrence, but an event that will change the course of all international relations and partnerships going forward. We must now redefine our economic relationships in order to suitably support and assist the global community and indeed our own countries to the degree that this war affects all of our nations. And if the effect now seems minimal, it will become much more in the coming months and years. Global hunger was already on the rise, and it's not only a current international crisis, but one that will now only worsen. The price of wheat has been growing steadily for several years, and the COVID pandemic has exacerbated this. And we've all seen that, especially for the poorer nations. According to a 2021 report from FAO, world hunger hit a 15-year high because of the pandemic, and this situation will worsen. The report states that the number of undernourished people in the world rose in 2020. Between 720 million and 811 million people in the world faced hunger in 2022, and more than half were in Asia and more than a third in Africa. And as we know, North Africa and other areas rely heavily on wheat imports, particularly from Ukraine. As the crisis continues, it's increasingly difficult to turn around this already existing dire situation, especially so amid war. David Beasley, Executive Director of the UN World Food Programme, told the UN Security Council this week that the war in Ukraine has created a catastrophe on top of a catastrophe, and will have a global impact beyond anything we've seen since World War II, because many of the Ukrainian farmers who produce a significant amount of the world's wheat are now fighting Russians. He also stated that the war in Ukraine is turning the breadbasket of the world into breadlines, and I think this is it's an important consideration, because it's not just in Ukraine. It's going to happen in the months to come, and we will see that. In our discussions, it's imperative that we establish a long-term strategic plan to address this situation, as well as the plan for the future, as this crisis has changed the playing field, possibly for generations. Canada, as the fifth largest supplier of wheat in the world, is a key player and can participate in this long-term strategy, and we must. The bigger problem may not be supply. Although Ukraine is the seventh largest producer in the world, and their absence will cause a significant dent in world supply, the problem for the world's grain market will be price. There will be a huge issue for the world's poorer countries, particularly in Asia and Africa. Compounding this problem is the fact that Russia is the world's third largest producer and may require their payment in rubles to support their faltering economy. Canada's geography is beneficial in this context. We don't have to cross borders to get from farm to market. These are well-worn paths for us. The second thing I'd like to talk about, and it's as important as food, and that's oil and gas. This is an essential sector that will have a critical role in redefining our economic relationships globally, and to improve and secure alternate energy resources, which will in turn assist in getting vital goods to areas most in need, in addition to powering nations' homes and economies. The role of petroleum in the Russian economy is no secret to any of us, and so the sooner major importers of Russian petroleum reduce their dependence, the sooner we'll stop funding its military, and the economic results and the squeeze that the Western nations and European nations hope to have will get tighter. As a Canadian from a petroleum producing region and former deputy CEO and board member of the offshore oil and gas regulator, it's difficult to see some of our European allies so heavily reliant on Russian energy. In global petroleum reserves, Saudi Arabia number 1, Russia number 2, Canada number 3. Canada last imported crude oil from Russia in 2019 and recently banned future imports, but this is a long-term program, not one of just today. Other countries are already following suit, but not all can do so right now. Earlier this week, I met with diplomats and representatives from the Council of the European Union's Working Party on Transatlantic Relations. They clearly conveyed that they don't need oil and gas, they need an alternative source to Russian oil and gas, and they need it for the long term. So this is not an immediate solution, but one that will have to roll out over the coming years so that the current European users of Russian oil and gas have choices in the future. It's how the economic levers of pressure can have an effect over aggressive posturing the next time. They told me that European ministers have specifically noted that Canada would be the alternate supplier of choice for oil and gas to Europe, and I agree. As a longtime economic trading partner to Europe, Canada already has a trade agreement in place and is a ready and responsible trading partner globally. There is more that can and must be done. Substituting Russian imports with a close ally's reliable supply is one logical and obvious step we can take together. Europe and the world are looking to Canada to help with this geopolitical problem, one that is killing thousands and has created one of the largest mass movements of refugees since World War II. We can supply food and fuel, two things desperately needed now and in the years to come. These requests, and this is important, these requests will have to be public, and here's why. The need for more fossil fuels runs headlong into the global consensus on efforts to mitigate the effects of climate change. This geopolitical change, where a world power with near unlimited military resources is attacking the innocent. World leaders who have their hand on the production and supply of these necessary commodities must make decisions for the greater good. And in democracies, that can only come using public pressure. For the organizers of this effort, this is an action item. So that's my view on that. The two key things, of course, there are many other things, and Poland and Moldova and Slovakia and all the neighboring countries are doing their part in handling the refugees, but there's a future that we have to look at, and that future is not in the next month, but it's in the coming years.